What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, and I'm back with some more Diablo 4 content to bring to you. Now, today we're going to be discussing, unfortunately, a little bit of a sad news, and that's actually going to be discussing the current state of affairs when it comes to uniques for the rogues. Now, unfortunately, I do consider myself a little bit more of a rogue main when it comes to playing Diablo 4 as it currently stands, and I really do enjoy the build variety that the class does bring, but unfortunately, when it comes to the unique side of things, there's not a lot I would do to be able to slot into a build. It's not like where we've got like druids or we've got necromancers where pretty much a unique will emphasize and just kind of like escalate like a build and just take it up to that next level. It feels like it's something that's crucial to the build and just kind of makes it something that was already good but just makes it that much better. When it comes to the rogue uniques, a lot of these are very lackluster, and we'll explain the reason why that is during this video. What we'll be doing is discussing the generic ones. We'll be discussing how good these are, as some of these do affect what the rogue uniques kind of do, and unfortunately this might be a little bit of a longer video just because I've done this about 4 or 5 times and they've come to around about 30-40 minutes, so hopefully I've managed to get it down this time. If you do enjoy this type of content, make sure to drop a like and subscribe, for it does help the channel out, and I highly encourage that if there's any kind of like items that you want to be able to discuss in here, while I will be discussing what's good, what's bad, and what actually needs to be buffed, or a potential suggestion from myself in this, feel free to use the comment section below to discuss what your potential changes would be, and I will be reading through all those comments and being able to have a discussion with everyone in the community. With all that said and done, what are we waiting for? Let's get cracking, let's have a look into the list. So let's start ourselves with the generic uniques, the ones that every single class can get, and we'll just briefly touch on these because, like I said, a couple of these will filter into the rogue uniques to be able to discuss how some of these kind of work and how some of these are actually pretty decent. So first and foremost, we'll start with the Fists of Fate, and these ones are on the unique ability how your attacks randomly deal anywhere between 1 to 300% of their normal damage. Overall, a pretty good unique that is quite widely used out there. There's quite a few builds that do use the Fist of Fate, and it's kind of important to get anywhere between a 250 to 300 kind of roll to really kind of emphasize that extra bonus of damage that you would be getting. Next, we do have the Frostburn, where on a lucky hit we have up to a 15 to 25% chance to instantly freeze enemies for 2 seconds. Overall, I'm a big fan of what the Frostburn does, even though I do feel like it is a bit too low on the low side of things, but once you get that 25% roll on these gloves, it does actually start popping off, and the rogue is able to take advantage of some of these, especially with the Frigid Finesse perk that allows at 3 points of you to do 30% more damage to frozen enemies, and also because frozen is treated as crowd control, you also have a few things there that will actually benefit from that as well. Next, we do have Mother's Embrace, which is a unique ring that not many builds do use in the community just at this moment in time, where if a core skill hits 5 or more enemies, you have 20 to 40% of that resource cost refunded. Personally, I'm not a fan of this when it comes to rogues, but I know a couple people that do like to use these. Next, we have the Penitent Greaves, overall probably one of the better boots that has like best in slot, mainly because it does have a way to instantly crowd control enemies because of the Trail of Frost that chills enemies. Once again, that chill allows us to benefit from things like Frigid Finesse, and also it gives us extra damage to chilled enemies, which does work with cold imbuement, which is quite nice to see. And like I said, it is one of the few kind of like better slots that do allow you to have extra damage modifiers, so Penitent Greaves is actually a decent shout. Next, we have Razor Plate, which is just a big bunch of thorns that allowing you to be able to do some extra damage every time you get hit. But considering that the rogue doesn't have much in terms of like staying, in terms of like wanting to be hit all the time, you'd kind of want to stay clear of the Razor Plate, in my opinion, when it comes to most rogue builds. Next, we have Temerity, which is a unique pants, which are actually pretty decent if you do combine them with the aspect. That allows you to be able to do more damage once you have a barrier active, as this is one of the more consistent ways of being able to keep that barrier up. Effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant you barrier up to 40 to 80% of your maximum life that lasts for 8 seconds, and it is overall a pretty decent ability for giving you extra ways to stay in the fight. Lastly, unfortunately, the last one unique is the Butcher's Cleaver, which cannot be used by the rogue class because it is an axe. But on this one, lucky hit, when you critically strike an enemy, you have up to 100% chance to fear and slow them by 40 to 75% for 4 seconds. There's no really much point in us talking about that because the rogues cannot use that anymore. So this brings us on to the actual dedicated unique drops for the rogue, and it's going to be using Maxwell or maxroll.gg, allowing us to be able to go in that order. So this is going to be 2 daggers, then the armor pieces, then the bows, and then lastly the jewelry. So let's kick it all off when it comes to the daggers, and the first one that pops up is going to be Asheara's Khanjar. Now this one is all about being able to increase your attack speed for more DPS. So hits with this weapon increase your attack speed by 4 to 6% for 4 seconds, and this stacks up 5 times, giving you a total of anywhere between 20 to 30%. Now, in terms of the rolls on this, it doesn't really help you out too much. We have basic skill damage, which, let's be honest, in terms of like damage or damage output, basic skills aren't going to be the most reliable when it comes to it. While puncture is a decent ability to actually spread some damage around, it's not the main kind of damage dealer with the vast majority of rogue builds. And on top of that, we also have damage to crowd control enemies, which is kind of decent, I suppose. But then a roll into movement speed for 4 seconds after killing an elite, which is kind of unique for a weapon, and it doesn't really kind of like help into the versatility of killing any enemies in the first place. And then we also have an extra roll into lucky hit chance. Now overall, Asheara's isn't terrible. It's not far away from feeling like a unique, feeling like it's usable. I do think that movement speed on 4 seconds after killing elite definitely needs swapping out for a damaging kind of thing. This is a weapon after all, and we should be having some damaging aspects or attributes on this weapon. But the real thing is going to be that uniqueness when it comes to it, and I don't like how it's worded, and on top of that, a lot of it can be overshadowed, especially a small of a kind of like roll when it comes to the accelerating aspect. What this does is on a critical shot, when it comes to a core skill, you have up to a 25% attack speed boost for 5 seconds. Now this can go on to everything, so this isn't just purely for core skills, this does apply to everything that is in your arsenal. So it basically does what Asheara's does, but for longer, and doesn't need to be ramped up to. So with Asheara's, you do need to land those 5 hits for you then to get the full benefit, and that means that you're going to be taking that place within those 4 seconds as well. Now you can stack the two together, which does mean that you will be getting up to a 55% attack speed boost, which is quite nice and definitely helpful when it comes to DPS. The only like I said, the main downsides on this is that you'd have to ramp up. We're sacrificing a lot of attribute rolls when it comes to damage because of our weapon, and you can't change any of those because it is a unique. The other downside to this is because it hits with this weapon, which means that you cannot use this when it comes to a ranged build. So if you are looking to like fire out your barrage much faster, or if you're looking to do your rapid fire a little bit faster as well, you can't get the benefit on using those main abilities. It has to be hits with this weapon, which means it's purely tied to a melee kind of focused playstyle. If that ever got changed, if they ever took that hits with this weapon part out and it was just purely based on hits, then Asheara's Khanjar might actually be a decent shout, and I would love to be able to test and experiment around with it. I also would like to see its bonus increased a little bit further to make it feel like a unique, so maybe up to a maximum of 50%. Maybe that might be a bit too much, and then bring it back down to 40, but 30 does feel like a little bit too small of a number, considering we have to ramp our way all the way up to that, and then just be able to get that benefit only for 4 seconds. So Asheara's, I feel like, needs changing in terms of like taking away the fact that it has to be hits with this weapon, and I also would like to see its bonus increased. But let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about this weapon? Next up we have the other dagger, and that's going to be Condemnation, and what this one does is your core skills deal anywhere between 20 to 40% increased damage when you are spending 3 combo points. Your basic skills using this weapon also have a 30% chance to generate 3 combo points instantly. Now Condemnation on paper sounds like a great weapon, but then when you get to the practical side of things, it does kind of fall a little bit flat. The reason why because of this is because it's all or nothing. You have to have 3 combo points, otherwise this weapon is going to be doing absolutely nothing for you. On top of that, the second sentence of this, where your basic skills using this weapon have a 30% chance, is just low enough that it doesn't feel consistent at all, and on top of that we have no visual aid to let us know when we have all 3 combo points. Now obviously you can pay attention to the UI at the bottom of your screen, and or bottom left if you have managed to move your UI around, and you can keep an eye on those counters that are over there, but the downside to doing that is that you're taking your focus away from the fight, you're taking it away from the enemies that are trying to hit you, just to be able to get an idea as if you've managed to hit those combo points. I can't even tell you the repetitive strain injury or the eye injuries that you possibly could do from just going back and forth between the center of your screen and to the bottom of your screen or the bottom left, and going back and forth every single time you cast a basic skill. This weapon would have a massive boost in viability if we had something around the character, or even an audio cue to let us know once we hit those 3 combo points, because then you would actually have an idea as to when you can pop off and get the full benefit of this weapon. Otherwise you are pretty much always going to be doing 3 abilities or 3 basic skills to make sure, guarantee that you have those 3 combo points, and then get the actual bonus that this weapon will be granting you. Now I would like to see this potentially get changed. I would like to see maybe even a boost to the combo points potential in terms of like the percentage that it will be giving you, but I think this could easily be solved by just having that audio cue, or even something like a visual effect around the player to let you know once you've hit those 3 combo points. This doesn't have to be tied to the dagger, this could just be tied to the rogue in of themselves, and that way we would know when we're able to get the full benefit of our core skills. But if I was to suggest a different kind of upgrade for this weapon, something to change it going round, I would like to see something happen with the 3 combo points kind of ability in of itself. If we manage to take away the inconsistency of that 30% chance to generate 3 combo points and replace it with something new, I'd like to see it so that we can build our way all the way up to 3 combo points, just as standard with our basic skills, and once we get those 3 combo points we get the full benefit of that 20 to 40% increased damage. But then when we expend those 3 combo points, the first time that we go to do that, once we hit 3 combo points, I'd like to see it actually keep hold of it for 1 extra ability, and then it gets spent. So every time that you get 3 combo points, I'd like to see us get 2 casts of it before we then get reset and have to build our way back up. This would then take away some of the issue and the pressures when it comes to building up your points to be able to get the maximum effect out of your core skills, and I think that could be pretty good to be able to mess about with. Now that might be a little bit too overpowered in some cases, especially with Barrage, by having extra arrows on top of it, and maybe because of that extra boost all the way up to 40% increased damage, but maybe we could just mess about with those figures instead. But I think that would make Condemnation feel a little bit more consistent, a lot more fun to take her out and about when it comes to the battlefield. So next on we get to go to the armor pieces, and that's going to be Cowl of the Nameless. Now Cowl of the Nameless in of itself is a decent unique. The only downside is that the fact that everything else lets it down. So Cowl of the Nameless has good rolls. It has rolls into dexterity and crowd control and duration and cooldown reduction, which is great to see. And in terms of the uniqueness of it, you gain 15 to 25% increased lucky hit chance against crowd control enemies. Now, most of the things that the rogue actually has access to does increase our lucky hit chances, and then we're kind of reliant on that extra percentage to see if we're able to proc off some of those results. For example, because of Cowl of the Nameless, if we add those extra 25% onto most of our abilities, so if we talk some of the most popular ones, for example, Puncture has a 35% base lucky hit chance, so adding 25% onto that because it is able to crowd control enemies with critical strikes where it always slows enemies, that goes all the way up to 60%, which is a bit more of a consistency boost, and that's nice to be able to witness. In terms of like core abilities, if we work our way around, Barrage has 16% as a lucky hit chance, which is ridiculously low. Twisting Blades has 33%, which is okay, I suppose. Flurry has a ridiculously low 10% chance, which is crazy to think as well. And then when it comes to Rapid Fire, this is at 20%. Now, the main real ones that benefits the majority, most from this because of how the skill tree works and how this helmet also kind of adds to those totals is going to be Penetrating Shot. At base, this has a 50% increased lucky hit chance, which is quite nice to have. If we then hit crowd control enemies, that goes all the way up to 75% at a god roll. And then because we have other things into the skill tree like Alchemist Fortune and Second Wind, if we manage to hit the conditions for both of these, that will give us an extra 30%, taking us all the way up to 105%, meaning that we're always guaranteed that every single shot of our penetrating shot is classified as a lucky hit. So the downside of that is that while it is taking away one of the dice rolls, one of the chances of being able to not hit a lucky hit, it then means that we're purely at the mercy of being able to go for the other percentages, because how lucky hits work is that you have to, on your abilities, you have to roll for a lucky hit, and then you have to roll for the other percentage that's based on that lucky hit to see if you're going to apply that effect. This is why I wanted to cover the generic stuff earlier, because, for example, Frostburn is actually a unique that does get used a fair bit because of those freeze mechanics, and because of also the other modifiers and multipliers that you do have when it comes to your damage. But even then, on a god roll Frostburn, that is still a 25% chance to instantly freeze enemies, and that is if we take out the fact that, you know, Penetrating Shot is just purely 100%, so we're only just purely focusing on that percentage now. If you get a bad roll on a Frostburn, that goes all the way down to 15%, which means that you've now used 2 uniques in 2 separate slots, taking away 2 aspects that could have been consistent for your build, and now you're just purely relying on a 15% chance to instantly freeze enemies. I think that's the crazy part about this, and I feel like that's where we kind of go into the other side of lucky hits, and that's where, you know, the percentages are just too low when it comes to it. Now, I fully appreciate that this is a lucky mechanic. It should be, you know, it's classified as a lucky hit, but we're putting so many resources into lucky hits just to still only have a maximum of 25% for this to proc off in the first place. This gets even worse if we look at things like lucky hit chances on the Fists of Fate, which have like extra rolls in terms of their attributes, to have even as low as 1.5% chance to immobilize or daze enemies, which is absolutely bonkers, which means that even if we get a 100% chance on penetrating shot, we then only have a 1.5% chance to instantly immobilize or daze an enemy, and that is too low in my books. They should never be that low. If you've heavily invested into lucky hits, you should be seeing some kind of payoff for this. So just to sum up, I do think Cowl of the Nameless is a decent unique for what it's trying to achieve. It's just every other piece of gear that does have a lucky hit chance on it is just letting it down. Now we will be revisiting this a little bit later on in the list, because there is another item or two items that will actually go into lucky hits, and you do want to pair those up with Cowl of the Nameless to try and give you some kind of consistency, but even then, those lucky hit chances are ridiculously poor, and they just let down what the Cowl of the Nameless is trying to do. Because of that, I don't think the Cowl does actually need a buff. I think it's everything else that needs a buff. So I feel like it's in a good place as it currently stands, but still, it's hard to recommend the Cowl of the Nameless when everything just kind of is what it is as it currently stands. So next up we have the pants, and this is going to be Eyes in the Dark. Now how this one works is unless it hits a boss or player, Death Trap will continue to rearm itself until it kills an enemy, but however that Death Trap's cooldown is increased by anywhere between 15 to 20%. Now, in terms of like the pants, in terms of the attributes, this is an absolute god piece of equipment. We have increases to dodge chance, we have increases to shadow damage, damage to elites just without any kind of like condition to even meet. We just purely have a damage to increased right there. And then we also have a damage increase to enemies affected by trap skills, which this unique is pretty much causing you to do, because you will be consistently using Death Trap over and over again on newer enemies. My main gripe is that Death Trap in of itself I'm not personally a big fan of. Now I understand there are a few builds out there in the community that do use Death Trap, and I'm not saying it is a bad skill, but it's hard to recommend it for something that is just purely going to be used for pulling enemies into a certain location. Now I do appreciate that it has good utility, it's just hard to recommend it for other skills that the rogue has access to, just to be purely use it for that, and then has a long cooldown. This is made worse from the fact that the Eyes in the Dark does increase that cooldown as well, so that means you're going to be waiting even longer to be able to get that trap back. Now, there are ways to reduce that down, obviously with attributes and being able to go for certain key passives and everything like that, but either way, Eyes in the Dark does increase that to a certain point, so that just kind of feels like Death Trap does become a little bit more useless. Now in terms of how you would use Death Trap in this kind of build, you would place it in a certain location, probably a high traffic area or a choke point, and then you would ideally be bringing more enemies into that choke point to consistently keep getting damaged by this over and over again. Overall, I think Eyes in the Dark is a decent piece of gear. I do think it complements a Death Trap build, and that's great to see. That's what we want a unique to be able to do for a class. I will say that I do think that the cooldown part is unnecessary. I don't get why that's part of it, and I would like to see that get removed. If I was to actually ask for anything to be buffed when it comes to this item, it's just take away that cooldown. It does not need it, and I think that makes it more than capable and more than justifiable when it comes to a unique. So now we get to go on to the last of the armor pieces, and this is going to be the gloves, and this is going to be Grasp of Shadow. Now I have a major issue when it comes to Grasp of Shadow, and it's weird because on paper it sounds like an amazing unique, it could be easily like top tier, but unfortunately in practice it just doesn't work the way you would expect it to. So we have rolls into attack speed, we have rolls into vulnerable damage, we have rolls into shadow clone damage, and we also have rolls into all core skills, which is actually really good when it comes to attributes on this, because instead of sacrificing all 4 ranks of a core skill, we're only sacrificing 2 just to get some extra damage multipliers when it comes to like vulnerable and shadow clone, which this will be summoning. It's also one of the only pieces that will affect your shadow clone ultimate as well, so therefore you will actually be getting some increased damage there if you do pair this up with the ultimate. But how this one works is on a lucky hit, damaging a vulnerable enemy with a marksman or cutthroat skill has up to a 20 to 30% chance to summon a shadow clone that mimics your attack. This is great to see because that means that you're essentially doubling your damage output and you're casting an additional skill just for free, no additional resource needed. But unfortunately how this one kind of has to proc, how this one works, doesn't work in that sense. I'm going to give you an example because I have used this for a penetrating shot build, and it just let me down massively. So let's run through a scenario. So you're doing a shadow bow, you're doing a penetrating shot build. You've put shadow imbuement on your bow. You've managed to get a horde of, let's say 10 enemies right in front of you, and you're just ready to be able to fire off your shot. So you fire off your first arrow to hit the head of the pack, for it to then pierce through everyone, to do the arrows that split off to the side. You've got the detonations going off crazy and everything like that, and you're really happy with the result. Out of those 10, let's say 2 or 3 are still left standing. But the most important thing to note on this is that you've killed the head of the pack, which is the one that you landed your shot on. Because Grasper's Shadow requires notice that you've got a lucky hit because you've gone into penetrating shot, and it's gone, oh, you've hit that 20 or 30% roll. I'm going to cast that free ability for you. Great. You think to yourself, you start seeing the shadow clone spawn, and you realise that he's just completely missed its attack. What it's done here is that on that percentage chance, it spawned a clone, but it doesn't spawn a clone on your current position. It will spawn it over to the side of you, so either to the left or right. So it will be attacking from a different angle from what you've currently anticipated for. You've led this mob all the way down, you've funneled them in, they're following you, and you've led them into a line so that you're able to maximise your damage. Your clone is now firing at a different line, and you've, more importantly, you've killed the head of that pack, which is where your attack was going for, and your clone is now aiming at the exact same location to fire off this ability. That means that because there's no target there anymore, the clone doesn't have any targeting of itself, it's not able to adjust or anything like that, so this ability just whiffs. It does no damage, none whatsoever, and it's because of that delay and also the fact of the position of where this clone has just spawned, compared with the fact that it now doesn't have any targeting of its own, just completely misses this attack. This means that you've now swapped up your gloves for something that does nothing, and that's crazy to me. Grasper's Shadow should not be doing anything like that. It's a unique, it should be doing something really good for the build, and on paper, it sounds amazing. It sounds like it could even rival something like Fists of Fate if you're able to build around it in that sense. But unfortunately, it just kind of falls a little bit flat because it has a chance, and a very high chance as well, for it to proc and then miss. So now this can be offset a little bit if you do go for a melee kind of focused playstyle. So for example, if you do go for a Twisting Blades build, you can use Grasper's Shadow to proc another clone that will then do Twisting Blades at melee range, which is much easier for them to be able to land. Now, the only downside with that is that if you do a Twisting Blades build, let's say, for example, you hit the enemy, you've procced it in, you've got your Twisting Blades stuck in them, they're still alive, and you go running off because you know that that return damage is going to finish them off. Your Shadow Clone will now spawn because you've met the conditions. It's managed to get that lucky hit chance on that percentage. It's spawned in, it's hit them with another Twisting Blades, and it kills that enemy for you. Now, granted, there isn't any downside to this. It's just the fact that your clone has now summoned, finished off the enemy that you already had finished off, and it's just finished them off a little bit quicker. That's it. Now, the real strength of Grasper's Shadow does come in when you go up against elites or bosses that are going to take multiple hits. If you're using this in close quarters, if you're using this for like a melee build, Twisting Blades is a perfect example of this because it means that the more blades that you've got stuck in an enemy, the more damage they will be taking. So therefore, Grasper's Shadow actually is a decent thing. But that means it's not going to be helping you out with mobbing. It's not going to be helping you out where like 95 to 99% of the time that you're going to be inside a dungeon or going around a certain area. So therefore, Grasper's Shadow just really falls a little bit flat, and it's just not there for every single scenario. Me personally, in its current state, I cannot recommend Grasper's Shadow. The only thing it needs to be able to actually improve itself is to give itself some kind of tracking so it can detect where an enemy is and it can go after a different enemy, especially for something like a penetrating shot build, so it can actually benefit from actually casting that and being able to get lucky in the first place. But we've had enough of the depressing side of things when it comes to certain uniques. Let's actually talk about a good one. So we're going to be talking about one of the first bows, and that's going to be Skyhunter. Now, this one is really, really good when it comes to paper. It does fall a little bit flat in some kind of cases because it means that you cannot set up with this weapon. But if you actually go into this properly, you can get some insane damage potential from it. Skyhunter is a first direct damage you deal to an enemy is a guaranteed critical strike. And if you have maximum stacks of the precision key passive when you cast the skill, you gain between 15 to 25 energy, and this can only happen once per cast. Skyhunter is great because we can also factor in the attributes here. Now, unfortunately, because it is a bow and not a crossbow, that's the only thing holding it back, which means we have damage to distant enemies, but it does have a roll into dexterity, which is great. We have a roll into marksman skill damage, which you primarily will be doing for a ranged build. We also have a roll into critical strike damage, which feeds perfectly back into the uniqueness of this weapon, and we also have rolls into the exploit passive. Now, exploit is one of the strongest nodes that does exist for the rogue class, because each point into this will give you 6% increased damage to healthy or injured enemies. So to start a fight and to finish a fight, exploit is huge. What this means is that at max ranks for this, it will go all the way up to 3. So you can have 3 in your original skill tree, that's 18%. Another 3 on this will put it all the way up to 36, and you can get it to roll on your amulet, which means if you do go into that as well, that would then put it all the way up to 54% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. I would highly recommend going that route, especially with Skyhunter, just to maximize like the first damage, and if you need to then finish enemies off, they should usually be in that injured kind of area again, and that means that one single ability will then finish them off. And the fact that it also works really, really well with precision is great to see, because that will always keep you topped up when it comes to energy, and it also has some ridiculously nice synergy when it comes to barrage, because that means that every single time you fire off the barrage the first time into a fresh group, you will always do that critical strike, which is 100% guarantee that it's going to ricochet into another target. Overall, I don't think Skyhunter needs touching. It does exactly what I want a unique weapon to do in this game, and I highly recommend it's probably one of the better items to go find and to be able to go farm for. Unfortunately though, I can't say as good things about the next one, which is going to be Windforce. Now, Windforce once again also suffers because it is a bow, but we hit some such worse attributes on this, whereas Skyhunter hit everything almost perfectly right. Windforce is a bit lackluster. So we have a roll into all stats, which isn't as good as dexterity. We have a roll into core skill damage, which is overall pretty decent. It's not a bad shout. We have a roll into another damage to distant enemies, so it's doubling down on the fact that it's a bow. And then we also have a roll into ranks of the impetus passive. Now, if you're not familiar with how this one works, so I wouldn't blame you because not many rogues actually do run this, but basically when you move 15 or more meters, your next attack is going to benefit for every single rank you have into this for an additional 7% damage. Now, similar to like how Skyhunter is, you can roll this onto your amulet, which means that you can go fully into this. So if you did get 3 points from impetus from your weapon, that's 21% damage. If you get 3 points in your skill tree, that's another 21%, so we're up to 42. And you can get 3 onto your amulet, which brings it all the way up to 63% damage. That is a huge damage boost, don't get me wrong, but you do need to be able to move 15 meters to get that to proc, and that's not going to happen multiple times inside of a fight. So if you want to go for like purely a sniping kind of build with a bow, Windforce could do that for you, but then you are sacrificing when it comes to the special effect on this, because I don't think Windforce does enough to justify its uniqueness. How this unique ability is, when hits with this weapon have up to a 10 to 20% chance to deal double damage and knock back the target. This is tied to a lucky hit as well, which means that you do need to be able to invest heavily, and I highly recommend if you are using Windforce, using Cowl of the Nameless to try and get that as close to 100% as you physically can. But then even then you are let down, because if you get a bad roll on Windforce, that will go all the way down to 10%, which means that you have a 1 in 10 chance of being able to get this to deal double damage and knock back the target. Now, with this special ability, though, you might notice the way it's kind of worded, that you need to deal double damage and then you knock back the target. You can't do one or the other. It's all or nothing, and that means that the majority of the times you won't be getting any kind of unique effect with this weapon, and there's no ways to increase that even further. Overall, I really hate what Windforce is able to do. While it sounds like it's good because dealing double damage and knockback, if you're dealing double damage with your skill, let's say this procs off and you deal that double damage, especially with impetus on here as well, and you've gone fully into it, if you're able to do that double damage and the enemy is still standing, just to be able to get knocked back, I've got to be honest with you, it's either a case of the weapon's letting you down, or it's a case of your build is just not doing enough in of itself. This shouldn't ever be a case where you're dealing double damage and anything is still left standing after being hit by Windforce. And I just think that's, you know, the knockback feels weird to be able to have on this weapon, but then, like I said, that percentage chance is way too low. Now, I would like to see this be tested to be bumped all the way up to, say, 40 to 50%. I would like to give Windforce a proper go with this weapon, and I feel like, you know, 40 to 50% is still justified for double damage, but considering what aspects we could have had on a two-handed weapon, and considering we're going for this instead of a crossbow that's got perfect rolls that fits into the rest of your build, and you then have an aspect you can put on there to double its effect. Overall, Windforce needs a massive shake-up to be justified, and I highly recommend that you just stick this in your stash and never take it out until it gets looked at. So that allows us to move on to the most fun out of the list, and this is going to be the Amulet, and this is Word of Hakan. Now, you'll have already seen the build video I've done around Word of Hakan. I've had a lot of fun messing around with this one, but in terms of rolls in it, it goes into non-physical damage, goes into ultimate skill damage, goes into critical strike damage with imbued skills, and it also goes into ranks of all imbuement skills. This has some really nice synergy with it itself, which is probably more than I can say for quite a few of the items that are on this list already. But what this will do is your Rain of Arrows ultimate is always imbued with all imbuements at once. This is amazing to witness, and I highly recommend that you do pair this up with a rapid fire build, so you can always just go cycle through your energy, and then you just have your ultimate back as fast as possible. The reason why this is so impactful is because the imbuement skills are ridiculously powerful in this game, especially if you do spec into them just right. Being able to have all imbuements though is also crazy. That means that you can have shadow detonations when you kill enemies to be able to do even more damage to area of effect. We also have poison on there, which means we'll be doing some damage over time, but we can also weaken enemies if we go into the skill tree just right. And we also have cold imbuement to also give some crowd control, being able to slow them down, and so that we have some extra damage multipliers to potentially even freeze them as well, so we benefit from something like Frigid Finesse. Overall, Word of Hakan is a lot of fun, and it's just exactly what I expect from a unique, and it's so fun to be able to mess about. If you want an idea for a build, I would highly recommend checking out this build right here on the screen, but in the meantime, Word of Hakan is absolutely fine, does not need touching, and is genuinely in a very healthy state. So there we go, that wraps it all up on the video. I've tried to keep this as condensed as possible, but there are so many uniques to be able to discuss and to be able to tie in and to be able to explain what I would like to get changed and why some of these, and why the majority of them anyway, are so bad. But let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts on any of the uniques are. There some that you feel I've got wrong? Feel free to point those out to me. I'm more than happy. This is just subjective. This is purely from my kind of opinion. So, you know, feel free to be able to have something different and let me know that in the comment section down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. And like I said, if you do enjoy this type of content, make sure to drop in a like and subscribe so we can get a bit closer to that 5k sub goal. But with all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.